What's up, guys? Welcome into Dog Central on a Thursday evening. Hope you guys are all doing well. I've been a little bit overdue to do a G Day recap show as it is, and then as things tend to do when the transfer portal opens, got some interesting news going on right now currently a potential quarterback transfer in UGA. We will get to that shortly. I want to start things off in chronological order because I'm also going to talk about Georgia's 2025 quarterback recruiting and just kind of the general, how should I say this? General approach and a shift, I think, in some of how Georgia is handling its NIL philosophies and recruiting as well. So, with that in mind, I'm going to jump off here and start with G Day because I thought G Day there was some things that were informative on the level of this position and that player and those kind of good things, but what I think is most important to note about G Day is this. Like Saturday, you had spring games going on all over the country at like playoff contender level schools. You had Ole Miss playing, you had Ohio State playing, you had Alabama playing. In Oxford, Lane Kiffin's team was playing basically a glorified 7-on-7 game on a 50-yard field. There's dunk contest. There was tug of war going on. There was, I think, tug of war going on with the sororities. Like you did not see any linemen unless you saw them dunking a basketball or playing tug of war. Uh, Ohio State was going what you call thud for their spring game on Saturday. The interesting thing about thud is that you're basically supposed to like wrap up and not tackle guys to the ground. I turned on the Ohio State spring game and watched it, and like it was basically a game of two hand touch. Which, like, look, I understand you don't want to get guys hurt in spring. That is the number one priority. So I'm not criticizing anybody for any of the decisions they made. Alabama had something more resembling an actual football game, but they were just offense versus defense the whole time, and they had one of those weird scoring systems where like a turnover is 6 points for the defense. I was in Athens on Saturday. I was down on the field for warm ups and the last few minutes of the game. Covered it, all that good stuff. Uh, what Georgia is doing in spring practice and with their spring game in particular, I think stands in deep contrast to like the pattern that we're seeing develop around the rest of the country. Right? What we watched in Athens on Saturday was something close to a real football game. You've seen all these coaches across the country. They're trying to find ways to have a college football spring game without actually having a game, right? And Kirby Smart was trying to think of ways to make that game more real. He told us in post game, next time we put these uniforms on, it's going to be Clemson, August 31st in Atlanta, opening the 2024 season. So uh, they wanted that to be as real as they could, and it felt like it mattered. Like being down there, there was real competition happening, and you saw Georgia's first team offense play Georgia's first team defense on one side, and then you saw the second team offense versus the second team defense. But what we watched was highly competitive, and those guys were going all out every snap. And you saw Georgia run the 1 minute drill with Carson Beck hitting, Dominic Lovett, and then Ra Thomas down the boundary, and then Lovett again crazy. He caught the ball basically on the back of a defender by the back pylon for a touchdown to tie the game. Obviously, that moment was competitive, and you could tell those guys cared, and you could tell that the sideline cared with how they ran down to celebrate with Lovett. But the whole game felt competitive to me. Okay, like the two teams combined for four scores over the last 6:54 of game time, but what really landed for me, like I think in the second quarter there was a second and 20 play, I believe, And back in the first team offense, they're behind the sticks after a penalty. It's an obvious passing situation. And all of a sudden, the first team defense is lined up and they've got 6 rushers right up at the line of scrimmage. And at the snap, like all of them take off upfield. For CJ Allen, it's a simulated pressure. He drops back into coverage. And you've got Michael Williams, you have Jordan Hall, you have Jalen Walker, you've got Damon Wilson, you've got Kristen Miller, you have all these guys like pinning their ears back against the first team offensive line and coming after Carson Beck. Like you don't normally see that in a spring game. Trevor Etienne, the running back transfer, like we have seen Florida fans kind of, criticize him a lot this offseason since he transferred by saying, he doesn't pass protect, he's selfish, he just wants the ball, all those kind of things. Go back and look at that 2nd and 20 play that I just referenced when the first team defense rushes 5, and you will see him basically like step up and load his legs and pick up a free rusher in Jalen Walker in the middle of, I think, the A gap, but definitely one of the interior gaps. And, he stands up, arguably Georgia's best returning pass rusher or second best returning pass rusher in a hole in the middle of a spring game. And he's outweighed by, 40 to 50 pounds by Jalen Walker. Like there was an attention to detail that was occurring that said to me that, basically how you do anything is how you do everything, right? And Georgia practiced, or I should say, scrimmaged on Saturday in a way that said to me that this program is, you can bring in NIL, you can bring in all the changes that have happened recently in college sports, but Georgia's program is still very, very much built on competition, and that's not changing at all. It's not going anywhere. Like that continues to happen, and I think that it was really impressive to watch. It was impressive to watch in person, especially when I went back after Georgia's game and watched highlights and clips, replays from some of the spring games that happened all over the place on Saturday. Like you just saw a ton of good stuff. Like you saw true football happening on the interior of the line of scrimmage. You saw Georgia blitzing. You saw inside linebackers rushing the passer. There was nothing vanilla that was designed to, like kick off Carson Beck's Heisman campaign. I think if anything, truthfully, they sort of probably tilted that a little bit, that scrimmage a little bit towards the defense. I think that like the offense had gotten the better of the defense throughout spring practice from what we had heard, and I think that Georgia, on the flip side on G Day, I'm not saying that they wanted to make anything appear a certain way that it wasn't, but I do think that Georgia created a environment where that game would be competitive, and the players responded in kind, and so good for them. I think it says a lot about Kirby Smart's program. Of you have all these schools that are afraid of showing too much, or they don't want to put their personnel out there for people to scout before the transfer portal opens. Whatever the reason is, these spring games are kind of going away. And Georgia's basically saying, you know what? Like, we recruit top 3 classes every year. We have a shitload of depth up and down the roster. And we've got a lot of really good young players who, let's be frank, like, they are good enough to play significant snaps probably almost anywhere else in college football. We're going to get these guys on the field. We're going to let them go at each other, smash heads, and we're going to try and create an environment that is as close to a game as possible and use those reps because there is value to them. So, thought that was good to watch. Sorry, one of you in the comments is saying having some mic issues. Hopefully, that's not the case for all of you. If anybody's watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments what you guys are getting from a sound standpoint. I'll turn this volume up a little bit, but I don't want to crash your ears. So hopefully things are working okay here. Hopefully that's good. We'll see. Um, okay, moving on a little bit. You know, continuing on with spring game stuff. I thought that the ETN debut was very impressive to me. You can you can only judge so much from these spring games, right? Like obviously we're not seeing full playbooks, particularly from the offense, but he has a burst that you're not really finding anywhere else. So I think it's exciting to see that. Like Georgia, I think really struggled to stretch the field at times over the last. Well, 2022, you had Kenny McIntosh, and that worked really well. But I thought in 2023, you struggled to have that pass catching element in the backfield, and not just like the big plays downfield where they would split McIntosh out wide, or they'd run McIntosh on a wheel route, or James Cook in 2021. There was a couple times where it felt like there was. Sorry, guys, we're having some. I'm gonna turn this mic volume back down. Hopefully, that's not blowing y'all out. All right. Hopefully, we're good. Okay. Um, yes, Sacred Grove. I agree. You need a running back that makes you hold your breath every time they touch the ball. ETN feels like that guy. Just watching him warm up, like it's impressive. There is a lot of burst. There's a lot of pop, and I thought on Saturday, it's rare that Georgia's defenders, especially their linebackers, it's rare that they like get beat to the corner, especially when they're even with somebody. And there were a lot of times where you saw a defender even with Trevor Etienne, and all of a sudden it's just like boom, he's pulling away, and it's impressive to watch him in the open field, his shiftiness, his ability to cut without slowing down, like all of those traits that you don't always see. I think from some of these bigger backs, like Roderick Robinson is a really good running back, and I think he can be very productive for Georgia. Kind of be a thunder to ETN's lightning, but like Georgia hasn't really had that home run hitter back in a little while. It feels like. I don't know the last time we saw a guy, bust a 60-yard touchdown run on an SEC defense for UGA. Like it's been a little while. McIntosh did have some of those runs at times, but I thought ETN, like the way he gets downhill and gets into the second level when he's able to get a little bit of clean space is very, very impressive. So I think that looking forward to 2024, Georgia's receiving core on Saturday, I thought it looked as deep as any UGA receiving core that I've seen under Kirby Smart. And so when you kind of flip that around and look at it from the standpoint of you've got all these weapons that you can spread out, you can go 4 wide, you can go 5 wide, and make people really uncomfortable. Like when you start getting all of those defenders out towards the boundaries to account for what you've got happening at the wide receiver position, uh, you give ETN some good run blocking up front, and I think he's a guy that can split your safeties. I was impressed with the wide receiver play. Like Ra Thomas really stood out to me just from a year ago to now. He is, I think, in a much different place in terms of his understanding of the offense. And the throw that Carson Beck made to him on that last drive when they went down and tied the game with under a minute to go, I don't think Carson Beck was, I don't think there was that chemistry or that trust or the rapport there uh, last year where Beck would have thrown that ball in. Like that was a tight coverage throw where he basically trusted Thomas to body off his defensive back and make that play. And it's really since George Pickens, like Georgia hasn't had that true boundary X receiver. Um, I think you got two of them this year. I think you have Ra Thomas and Colby Young was a kind of a proven commodity as a like contested catch monster at Miami. I think he was maybe the leading contested catch guy in the ACC in 2023. And I mean, you saw him just basically box out Julian Humphrey like he was a rebounder in the paint. Like if he puts his back to you and walls you off, it's going to be really, really hard to get your arm between his hands and the ball. So I think there's a lot to be excited about from UGA. Like I felt in 2023 that with Thomas, Georgia was kind of building towards that Alabama game, towards the playoffs, where it was like you just wanted to get him ready for a spot in the season where you could kind of use him in those contested catch situations. And everyone else that Georgia played for the most part, like Lat McConkey, Brock Bowers, Dom Lovett, whoever you want to name, Dylan Bell against Tennessee, Rosemy Jackson, like those guys were able to get enough separation working the middle of the field and kind of up the seams where Beck was able to just kind of live on some of those like deep comeback routes and these levels concepts towards the sidelines where you've got guys basically running variations of out routes at different depths on the field. And I think you saw basically against Alabama, you probably played the best secondary in college football last year. And with a hurt Brock Bowers and a hurt Lab McConkey, they were able to really clamp down on some of those routes that I was just talking about. And I think the result was like that was the game where having Thomas in that 6'3" frame to throw, balls towards the sidelines and just let him go up and get it and let him use his size to wall people off in coverage. Like that was the moment I think where his value really, really would have come to fruition. Obviously, he was hurt, but at the start of spring practice, I wasn't sure that we were even going to see him because he was still recovering from the foot injury that held him out late in 2023. So for him to not just get back for spring practice, but to like really look like he's kind of got a grasp on what's going on. There's a couple plays I saw him, sort of blocking in on. That, and I mean, like, I know that this is cheesy or like not something that is sexy at all, but Georgia's perimeter blocking looked fantastic on G Day. Even the young guys like Nitro Tuggle laid out a defender on that Sokovie White catch and run for a touchdown. You saw sort of a lot of those types of plays where guys were doing enough blocking to help a running back get to the edge or to help a ball carrier get a few extra yards. And the long touchdown runs that I was just referencing that Georgia didn't really have in 2023. Um, those are how those happen, right? Like the offensive line has to do their job in the middle, but those receivers blocking on the perimeter is what really like turns, I think, some of these 20, 30-yard gains into a house call from 60 yards. Okay. Other things that I thought were worth knowing, worth acknowledging on G Day. I liked what we saw from the defensive line as a whole. Like I think the offensive line had kind of been the story of spring practice for Georgia. Uh, the intel that I had gotten, and I think most people had gotten, was that we were basically, gonna see a lot of dominance from the offensive line. That's what Georgia had been seeing was just a lot on the OL where they were kind of bullying the defensive front. On Saturday, I thought that they held their own really well. You saw good gap fitting up front. I think Jordan Hall, like it's interesting. Jordan Hall, I think, was a guy that was immediately a talented enough pass rusher to demand snaps as a defensive tackle last year. Thought Saturday you saw him look better as as kind of a run stopper. Did a better job fitting gaps inside. Kristen Miller looked really, really impactful, like high motor. It's hard with a spring game because you're not really seeing guys actually sack the quarterback, right? But I did think that we saw a good amount of plays where you saw those interior linemen getting upfield. Nazir Stackhouse, like I was kind of hard on him at times in 2023 because it felt like he was this really good player in 2022, and it seemed like if he had a good season last year that he was probably going to be heading off the NFL draft, and it felt like on Saturday he looks a little just slimmed down. I don't know what it is, but just his motor seemed higher. He seemed faster getting upfield at times against Georgia's guards in pass rush situations where he could really pin his ears back. So I think that there's a lot to be excited about in terms of that D line. Still curious to see what the situation is at edge. Like Michael Williams playing outside linebacker more and more is a good thing. I mean, from a defensive standpoint, that was probably my biggest impression from G-Day is Michael he's that guy. Like he is basically, going to be I think he's going to be a top 10, top 15 draft pick next year and you see him really really just I think setting the edge in the run game and also getting upfield in the pass game in a way where he's going to be a three down player. He's been a three down player for Georgia the last 2 years. I think people forget, he struggled with injuries a lot and played through them last year, but he's, I think, going to have like, a type of, an all American type season, possibly kind of playing that sort of hybrid role for Georgia, where they let him be more of a stand up pass rusher on third downs. Gabe Harris, as far as kind of those true jack outside linebacker guys, Kirby, kind of really, you don't hear Kirby brag on guys, especially younger players, very much unless it's very warranted. And he talked about it in his press conference. Gabe Harris is physical and he's twitchy. I remember when he showed up at Georgia last year as a true freshman. His first practice, it's a source of mine. I asked, about the three freshman edge players, and he was like, "Gabe Harris is physical as shit." And I think you saw some of that on Saturday. Like he's a very physical player, brings the issue, and exciting for Georgia to look at going forward. Other things that stood out, very random, I know, but Jamal Merriweather, the offensive tackle, I was down on field pregame and I was watching the linemen warm up. Like even amongst all the 5-star offensive linemen that Georgia has, the Tate Ratledges and the Monroe Freelings, and even Xavier Truss, who's a giant human being, like Jamal Merriweather is huge. That guy is 6'8", like legit 6'8", and I think he was probably around 270 when he came in. He's certainly not anymore. I think he's probably 300, if not a little over that, but like a clean 300. That guy is gonna be a problem. I was talking to George Foster, former Georgia left tackle, former first round draft pick. My co-host on the 100 Sanford podcast, but he was down pregame and he used to scout for the St. Louis Rams, and he was kind of talking about like, who is that guy? So keep an eye on him. You saw him play a lot of second team OL reps on Saturday for G-Day, and I'm very interested to see how the tackle situation kind of plays out for Georgia. Xavier Truss has obviously been in the program a long time, played right tackle on Saturday. I think he's had a very good spring, but we did see him when he had to fill in at right tackle against some better, higher level pass rushers last year, struggle a little bit. So curious to see what goes on there. Other things I would, that linebacker group is just freaky. CJ Allen, Braylon Wilson, they're, they're 6'2" and they can run like the wind. And what's scary is that Chris Cole and Justin Williams, I think Chris Cole's bigger than any of them. He, I think, is like in cleats, probably pushing 6'4". He's definitely a legit 6'3". You saw him come off the edge at times. Like he's got some bend to him. Uh, what Jalen Walker kind of is right now or is going to be in 2024 in terms of a guy who's playing inside linebacker, is able to cover as a linebacker in space against tight ends and running backs, and then it's also a third down pass rusher who's a true threat to go and get sacks. Like I think Chris Cole could be sort of the next Swiss Army knife type guy, like that chess piece. Yes, and as Sacred Grove points out, almost, saw that screen pass, I think it was, or a pass to the flats and almost jumped and had an interception. But like, he's fun to watch. He's just very instinctive player, and I think he's going to be really really good. And it's not it's hard to do these recap things because there's just so much like raw talent when you're talking about Georgia's roster. Justin Williams is obviously 5-star recruit for a reason, but like Chris Cole just really stood out as even amongst all of these very, very, very impressive athletes. Like he's just a little bit different. I also think that you look at the secondary. Dan Jackson's going to be hard to beat out, at least I think early in the year. Like I would not be surprised at all if Georgia gets to that Clemson game August 31st, Labor Day weekend, and it's Malachi Starks and Dan Jackson back there at safety because Jackson. I know he's not KJ Bolden necessarily, but it's like he does run a 4.4, and he's healthy. I think in a way that he never really was last year after that foot injury that he had. So you've got him now in a spot where I just think he's in good shape again, and he obviously knows the defensive scheme. He's a smart player, and I think look at him potentially to be that guy at least in the beginning of the season. Like he was really really good, not just with the cover two stuff where he's playing zone up high and he's sort of a center fielder so to speak, but like you saw him breaking up passes in the flat. You saw him staying with twitchy receivers on like short out routes. If he can do that, then there is no reason at all why he shouldn't start. KJ Bolden, you know, saw him get beat on that jump ball by Anthony Evans on I think the first play of the game for the second team offense. Not really worried about that at this point. Like I was just kind of interested to see him how he looks athletically on a college football field with other college football players. He moves differently than anybody else. Like, he just doesn't take bad steps. It's fascinating how quickly he arrives at the ball. I think he's probably more instinctual than people have probably given him credit for to this point. And it was fun to watch him. Like there was a couple moments where you saw a run play happen and he's lined up, back like a safety should be, and all of a sudden he's up, behind the line of scrimmage trying to get in on a tackle or a play. Like he just kind of arrives places that you don't expect him to be, especially if you're watching him pre-snap. You're like, oh, how did he get there? That's kind of, I think, the story on an elite safety in a lot of cases, which he definitely is. But going to be fun to watch. Definitely has all the tools, and I think Georgia, if things work out well for them, you could see a scenario where it's Starks and Dan Jackson back there opening the season, and then you kind of are bringing KJ Bolden along, and maybe by the time you get to college football playoffs, he's more in that significant snap type of role. So we'll see how that goes. Really, that's one of the main things I've got for G Day. Let's move off of that because I do have other things I want to talk about. We're going to get into the portal and all of the excitement going on there in just a moment. But I do first want to mention 2025 quarterback recruiting. So the reason why I bring this up, and if you're not subscribed to the Dog Central Forum on the Players Lounge on Georgia's Players Lounge site, TPL Georgia, Go check it out just because we're doing a lot of, I think, really good work there. Have a long report that I put out today that is basically kind of all about. Thank you, Evan. Appreciate you reading and subscribing. Honestly, it means a lot. Put a lot of stuff out today, sort of on the background of the 2025 recruiting class. Not gonna repeat all of it here because it's a long article, and you know I want to respect that folks subscribe and all of that good stuff, and make sure that they're getting context and all of that they can't get elsewhere. But I do want to point out that the moment that Matt Zollers, who was the number one guy on Georgia's board, number one quarterback on Georgia's board for the 2025 recruiting class, Matt Zollers, that was the guy Georgia identified as the quarterback preference. Not to say they didn't want other guys, but he was the one they chose to focus in on, right? Came down to Georgia and Mizzou for him. And I think it was a situation where Georgia had, obviously better supporting cast around him, better guarantee of a good offensive line, better all these things that you want in terms of number of, you know, um, number of like opportunities to go win a national title, and I think Zollers and his family also felt really good about the development potential that they could get from Mike Bobo in Georgia. But at the end of the day, there was this massive NIL offer from Missouri that is life changing kind of money, and I think that he saw that and look, like, if I was a 17-year-old kid and someone offered me money that really set me up, it would be hard to say no to that. And uh, to be frank and speak in frank terms, I think it pissed Kirby Smart off in a way that maybe some other recruiting stuff hasn't in recent years since NIL started. You've seen Georgia embrace NIL, and I don't want to act like you haven't because they certainly have. But throughout a lot of this stuff, I think Georgia has also sort of been in this spot where um, they've got to pay for a roster with 70 elite players, 70 former blue chip recruits. Like, they've got to keep all of these guys happy. And a Missouri or an Auburn, or I mean, Auburn's maybe not as good an example as Missouri. Let's just say Missouri, for example. Last 3 years, right? Luther Burden comes down to Georgia and Missouri, goes to Missouri. Big NIL offer. Williams Nwaneri, elite defensive line player, comes down to Georgia and Missouri. Big NIL offer, swings to Missouri. Matt Zollers, same story as those first two, right? And like Missouri and other schools in the SEC, they kind of have this luxury of like they're not ever going to be in on as many elite recruits as Georgia is. So even if they're not raising as much in total in the NIL space as a UGA or an Ohio State or an Alabama or whoever you want to pick, they are able to put more resources into one great player because they it's worth it, right? Like they can go out and say, "Hey, we just beat Georgia for a 5-star recruit." Like, what's a better crack to sell to your fan base than, "Hey, we just beat Georgia for a 5-star recruit, and because of that, you know, this record is going to turn into that record." Now, Mizzou had a great team last year, but you look at like Auburn and how they handled their recruiting last cycle, where they went and got these 5-star receivers. They still don't have anybody to really throw to them yet, but like they went and got these 5-star receivers, and that's the type of stuff that truthfully keeps coaches in a comfortable position job wise because it says we can beat the top dog on the recruiting trail, and it sells people something excited to look forward to in coming years, right? And at least until they transfer. But I think with Georgia and this whole 2025 cycle, uh, it sort of broke something loose a little bit in a good way if you're a Georgia fan, where I think that the UGA apparatus has kind of come to a spot where they're like, look, you know, we're going to have to be competitive at least in NIL. Yes, we do have the best development. We do have, the best coaching staff. Like we have all these things that we can offer you. And because of that, they are going to get a discount in NIL. But the delta, the difference between, what the offers are can't be so massive that it just erases everything else. Now, if you have a kid that only cares about NIL and that's all they're looking for is the best NIL package they can find, that's probably not going to be a Georgia kid anyways, right? That's not really what Georgia is about. Georgia is still going to preach like, hey, you come here and you get developed long term and you really get paid when you go off to the NFL draft and you get that contract. That's going to continue to be the story that they tell on the recruiting trail. But it is also a spot for UGA now where, I think with the Juju Lewis situation, right? Like Georgia made a good NIL sort of, presentation to Juju Lewis and his camp. Now, there are other dynamics at play here where like I think there was a great article that came out last week by, I believe, Luca Evans is the name of the reporter. He's a USCB reporter, and he talked about, hey, like these kids and their families, their recruits, they sit down with Lincoln Riley, and he's wearing the USC logo, and they're shaking hands, and the staff says, we think your son's valuation is around this ballpark, and then they end up getting, a much smaller percentage of what that number was. Like that, there's a lot of that going on, and you can you can't really like deal. I think if you're Georgia or any other recruiting school at that point, like if the families are not really understanding the difference between what they're being offered, then that is what it is, right? But like Georgia, I think is moving into a spot now where they are going to be much more willing to, I think, be competitive with some of these NIL offers when it's guys that they really, really want, and when it's a player that they think, there's an elite player here. Obviously, they get Montgomery. I think when Zollers went to Mizzou, they basically went to Lewis and Montgomery and said, whichever one of you comes first is going to get the spot. And you saw what Montgomery decided to do was come to Georgia. So I think Georgia is in a really, really good spot in terms of their NIL moving forward. You saw Josh Brooks, the athletic director, tweet out earlier this week. I want to make sure I say this properly and don't give out any improper information. So let's see. What did Josh say? He said the Classic City Collective complements the experience that UGA Athletics has to offer. Join the 21 Club, which is Georgia's NIL donor club, to attract top talent and help our coaches retain talented rosters. Like Georgia on Saturday at G Day, they put up a little QR code on the scoreboard that was like, bring out your phone and you can point it at the QR code and you can go ahead and donate to the NIL program. So I think that they're activating donors in a more maybe meaningful and relentless way than they were before. I think that they are prioritizing NIL. I think there's a uniformity in terms of messaging on NIL that maybe hasn't been there up to this point. And I think that, Kirby Smart personally has been working his ass off to go and, help Georgia raise those NIL funds. And now it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with those. I think if Juju Lewis had, kind of decided to play ball with Georgia, then you would have had some money go there. That money, it's back to be spent now. And all of a sudden, this is what we call a transition, folks. All of a sudden, you've got the transfer portal opening. Look at that. Ta-da! And we are here in transfer portal season, opened up on on Tuesday. So far for Georgia, just Andrew Paul, a talented running back who I thought looked good on Saturday at G-Day. He's now almost a year and a half, I believe, removed from the ACL injury that he had in fall camp a couple of years ago. He really lit fall camp up in 2022. So there's a little bit of unfortunate kind of circumstances there because I think he may have had a nice season in 2024 if he'd stuck around. But I do find it very interesting that so far Georgia hasn't had like too many players leave. I think they got to have some more leave in order to really get where they're going to have to get in terms of numbers, right? You did see Tyler Williams, the wide receiver. He decided to, hit the portal as well. So you got a couple, but they still are going to, you know what? I forgot about Chad Lindbergh. Okay. Lindbergh. I think Lindbergh also counts for spring portal. So that's 3. But if they want to bring anybody in, it's hard to know exact numbers on scholarships. But if they want to bring anybody in, yeah, Evan, thank you for that. Lindbergh went to Rice. If you want to bring anybody in, you still have to get under 85. So, if you want to bring one in, you got to get to 84, blah, blah, blah. The math's obviously pretty obvious there. But we are in a spot now, folks, where Jaden Rashada just announced this evening that he is going to hit the transfer portal. So it's going to be very interesting to see. Like Kirby Smart has been, I think, extremely transparent with the media, with fans, with his own players that he wants 4 scholarship quarterbacks. So now you're in portal season. And I mean, it's interesting. Like you had Raiola and Puglisi committed for the 2024 class. Obviously, Raiola flips at the end of the cycle. You had Jaden Mayaba, talented UNLV quarterback. I think he was the Mountain West Conference Freshman of the Year, who committed to Georgia at one point during the December portal window, and then all of a sudden his NIL agent gets a call from USC. USC, I think, was very worried about their quarterback situation, was willing to really throw a lot of resources at their quarterback situation. So, that commitment was short-lived. He is in Los Angeles now playing for Lincoln Riley and the Trojans. Is the third time going to be the charm for Georgia? I think is the question now, right? Jaden Rashada entering the transfer portal. The moment that I saw he was entering the transfer portal, I was texting with some friends in a group chat, and I was like, Kirby Smart has a chance to do something really hilarious here. And then literally, like maybe 2 minutes after that, I started getting texts from sources that are like, "Watch Rashada, watch Rashada." My understanding is that there is a strong mutual interest between Jaden Rashada and Georgia. That basically there's, I think, like, I'm not sure exactly when they can officially contact each other. If it's, I think they have to wait till his paperwork has been processed. But whenever that moment happens, I expect him to be on the phone with Georgia. I think that he's probably, I would be surprised if he didn't visit. I'm trying to remember honestly, and some of you in the comments may know better than I do off the top of my head, sort of where Georgia is at the moment with what's his face, or I'm sorry, where they were when Rashada was recruited. I don't really remember Georgia being very heavily involved with him. Obviously, first time around, he had a very NIL focused recruitment. I don't think that's a secret at all, right? Like, it became this Florida Miami back and forth pull, and that's sort. What's interesting is like there's these prospects sometimes where all this perception gets tied up into this one kid, and you have this situation where you have Miami and Florida basically in a bidding war with each other trying to land this quarterback. And it's as much about taking the kid from the other school as it is about, what that staff wants to do with him. But, there's this NIL package that was reportedly, I think, around $9 million, right? Let's see how much it was. $13 million NIL deal that was allegedly reneged on by Florida after being promised. Um, that happens all the time, sadly. Like, there's a lot of guys that end up going to a school because they're just promised a big number, and they get there and that number is never really given to them. So um, Rashada did the year at Arizona State, and I did actually watch him. I watch a lot of late night West Coast football. I watched his opener last year against Southern Utah, and he looked nice at times. 18 for 31 on 34 dropbacks. That tells me if you're throwing 31 times on 34 dropbacks as a true freshman quarterback in your first start, that tells me that you get through your reads pretty well, even if it is against Southern Utah. Arizona State did not have good wide receivers last year. They were basically running a glorified Wildcat offense by the end of the season. So I think he's a guy that has good field vision. Like, he throws a really, really pretty deep ball. That is what I remember the most about kind of watching him. I think on the season, let's see what his deep ball numbers were. He only played in 3 games, which means he still has a full 4 years of eligibility. Yeah, on the season, his deep balls were just 5 of 14 for 3 touchdowns. But I do think he's got that look, right? Like, there's something about an elite level quarterback when you watch them throw, when you're around them, when you kind of see their stature and their release and all of that good stuff. It just looks different, and Rashada looks different than most guys. Georgia has Ryan Puglisi, who they just recruited in the 2024 class. I think they love Puglisi. I think, tons of raw talent, tons of tools. I just don't know how soon those tools are going to be ready to be used. I don't know when the time will be where, for Ryan, that big arm and those legs and all of that stuff kind of comes together to where he's running the offense the way that they want them to run the offense. Gunnar Stockton is really interesting at this point. I like, you saw him have some decent moments on G Day where he got the ball out downfield and kind of showed off some arm strength. I thought you saw a better display of his arm strength this spring game than you did last spring game. But he also is, I think, a little more prone to taking off and running. One thing that I actually noticed, I went back and found a passing chart for him on G Day, and I think like 15 of his attempts were in the right, flat, basically like 0 to 9 yards off to the right, which I think basically what I see from Gunner, both in his throwing charts and then just watching his tape, right, is that he gets the ball and he starts his reads off the right shoulder, and he either throws that first read, maybe he makes it to the second read and throws that, but it's like normally he's either throwing that first read or he's taking off and running, and he's definitely not a guy that's getting all the way around the field. I don't see him getting past midfield with his reads. Can he? Absolutely. He's got the ability to do it for sure. Like, that's part of his maturation. But if you are running a college football program, and if you're running the Georgia football program where you have a supporting cast with the prerequisite talent that can go win a national title every year if circumstances are correct, you really, really can't just say, hey, we think he's going to figure it out. You either see it right now or you don't. You can't assume then anything's going to happen, especially the quarterback position, where, to be frank, like nobody has really figured out properly yet. Not the NFL, not any of the recruiting services, not me either. No one's really figured out exactly how to predict quarterback success in terms of high school to college and then college to the pros. Like there are traits that I believe in. There's traits that other people believe in. We don't have to talk about that right now, but you have a responsibility if you're Georgia and Kirby Smart to go out and get a guy if you think he's got the elite physical traits and the tools needed to potentially be a high end quarterback, then go get him. And look, I'll say this about Rashada. Um, if you kind of go and look at some of his throws and some of his tape and just his stature, the way he stands in the pocket, a little more mobile than Carson Beck, but like a lot of what he sort of is reminds me of a young Carson Beck. That worked out for Georgia, but look, there was a time where there was people that didn't think it was, that didn't think Carson Beck was ever going to start at Georgia. So you got to go and do your diligence if you're Georgia, and I think they will. Um, I'm very fascinated to see how it plays out. I don't have any like deep intel on Rashada yet, where I can say this is like a done deal, but I will tell you that it certainly feels that way. Like it feels like it's trending that way. Will NIL or something like that get in the way of this? I don't know. Obviously, other suitors have the right to contact him and will. Somebody might make him a more compelling pitch, but I think the best thing for that kid, if we're being, you know, just looking at the future, not necessarily for 2024, but how does he get from right here to the NFL? Best thing for that is for him to come into a place like Georgia where, business is done a certain way and to let him go. Sorry, I got dogs barking in the background. Let him go into the portal. Like if you bring him into Georgia, you can kind of like rehab him in a way. I think the way all this stuff went down with Florida and Miami and the $13 million NIL deal and how public that whole situation was, I think there's probably some scar tissue there, and rightfully so. And so I think this is a great opportunity for him to like come and be in a program that is run more like a pro franchise in terms of mentality and the way guys work. And you can come in and be surrounded by a good support system. And really, the thing is that the story at Georgia is Georgia, right? Like the story at Georgia is bigger than any one player. The story at Georgia is you have this program and this team that is going and trying to win national titles every year, and certain players are obviously part of how that story unfolds. But if Jaden Rashada comes to Georgia, then he becomes another player in that program. And I don't think the story is going to be him, at least not for a while, not unless we see him end up being the starter in 2025 or something like that. I think that's probably what would be good for a kid like that who's kind of been through this very public ordeal that you know probably what a I'm sure it wasn't fun to go through, but B, it may have messed with his confidence and some of those things on a certain level. Like, it's just a lot of stuff for people to know about an 18-year-old kid. So, wherever he ends up, I do hope it works out for him. I think the way that he's been portrayed by some fans and just some people in general has probably been a little bit unfair to him. So, it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. Uh, Long story short, I would not at all be surprised if we're back here in a few days or a week talking about Jaden Rashada committed to Georgia. What does it mean? So Thank you. There's been a ton of you who have watched live tonight, and I really appreciate it. I know it's been a little while since I've been on here, which is really just my fault. So uh, I will, we're kind of through spring practice, and we're moving into uh, a moment where we're actually going to know what Georgia's roster will look like through the fall. So, um, planning to do a lot of preview content. I have a uh, fun series planned for you guys that will premiere here in the next few days, actually. And it's going to be a kind of a deep dive look back at some significant moments, or a significant moment, I should say, in Georgia history. But will hopefully be kind of the first of many. So hope you guys will check that out. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and go check us out at dogcentral.com. TPL Georgia. You want to keep up with the transfer portal, if you want to keep up with what's going on with Rashada, if you want the full backstory on 2025 quarterback recruiting, got all of that over there. So hope we will see you on the forums. And until then, hope you're all having a wonderful spring evening, and hope you all stay blessed.